This week we talk about approaching a design project, finding a designer, and how to communicate to your designer so that you actually get what you want. Welcome back to the Inner China Show. I'm in gorgeous Samsaling Monastery in Yunnan, China. This week I talked with Fred Perrotta of Tortuga Backpacks, and over the years of building his amazing brand, he's had the opportunity to do a lot of design projects and understand exactly what it takes to make a good physical product design. So I picked his brain and I'm excited to share it with you today. Let's do it. So Fred, if I am an entrepreneur that is approaching a design project from the beginning, I've got an idea that I want to implement. How do I think about this project? What different types of design projects are there out there for me to start designing?
Sure. So probably the easiest one is taking something that already exists and just white labeling it, which is actually what we tried to do from the start. When we first started, we were kind of following the 4-hour work week playbook. So a lot of what he advocates in there is he was doing it with some kind of supplement business, but take an existing product, put your brand on it, and try to sell that. So that's kind of the easiest way to get started, and what we tried to do, but we couldn't find a product that we liked to fit into that. I think it's also getting a lot harder to do that now because everyone read that book and thought they could easily do that, so they kind of did. So limited opportunities. The projects that we've done more of are creating products from scratch, which is what we end up doing when we couldn't do the white labeling, and then also tweaking existing products. So for us, sometimes we've done that kind of skipping the design process, doing that more directly with a factory. If it's like a very simple change, move this thing over here, change this buckle from this type to that type. But we've also done, we're now kind of on the third iteration of our flagship product. So that one had start with the initial version, kind of learn what people do and don't like, created a second version, and now onto the third where we keep kind of improving it and incorporating more and more feedback from customers.
Right. Really, really cool. So there's like the OEM approach, which is just grabbing something off the shelf the factory already has and kind of adding your own brand and maybe a little color tweaks or small tweaks. And then there's brand new and then tweaking what you already have. Is kind of the 3 different approaches you can take when looking at a design project.
Right.
So so now we know kind of what project and how we're approaching it. What are some of the necessary questions? Because before I even approach a designer, what do I need to be asking myself about my design before I even approach that designer?
Yeah, I think probably most people's first instinct is to come with a list of requirements or a super detailed description of what the product is, which was definitely my first instinct when we started. But that's helpful, but isn't really what a designer needs. So a designer's job, many people think of it as like you make something look pretty, like a web designer. You take an ugly website and you make it look nice, which is part of the job. But really, a designer is solving kind of creative problems. So you're going to have better odds. It's great if you kind of know some of the requirements for your product and can share that. But I find it more helpful if your designer is any good to kind of bring goals and problems to them and then work with them to solve those. That gives them a little bit more leeway, even if you feel like you have the ideal final product in your head. At worst, you'll get another version you can choose from. The designer will also probably be more invested in the project if they get to use some creativity and try to solve some problems. And then the other thing I would bring to that discussion is as much information as you can get on who your target customer is, because the product is one thing, but you also have to think about who you're eventually going to sell it to or market it to, and who it has to work well for. So I think that kind of goes in with the problem that you're solving, and you also have to know who you're solving it for.
Yeah. So the designer is really taking your target market and applying that to this product that you're creating. So you're looking for a very entrenched and skilled designer. So it brings up the question: where do we go to find this kind of designer? Do I need to hire somebody at $60 to $100,000 a year, or do I go straight to the factory because the factory might have designers, or do I go online to find a good designer? Where did you start?
We've done we've done a little bit of everything, kind of starting out from what was easiest and kind of evolving that process. So when we first started, I mentioned kind of thinking about the OEM route. In retrospect, we might have been able to talk to a factory that was already making, say hiking bags or something close and talk about some design help there. Some factories some factories are definitely better at that than others. Some are really good with sampling and product development, which we've seen from, you bring them kind of a tech pack for products like ours, and some can look at that and then make you a sample that's pretty good. And some look at that and say, we don't want that business. We want to just make more of what we already know how to make. So that's pretty dependent on the factory. When we first started, the first designer we worked with, we found on Elance, which I think is now Upwork.
Yeah,
Anyway, of the
the
one of the
merged.
freelancing
Yeah.
sites.
Yep.
Yeah. So kind of depends what mediums you're working in, if you'll be able to find the right people there. For us, doing a backpack is kind of a cut and sew, they call that process. That is very different from if you want to do some kind of technology or hardware, or something that requires injection molding, just, different techniques, different people will be more familiar with and better able to design to. So that's another place to kind of look, and that'll be all project based. So you can work out what your end goals are, and then what the price may be for that. There are some more specialized sites which I learned about later, unfortunately. So one of them is called Coroflot, which is kind of a clunky name. It's Coroflot. And it's basically a site. A lot of designers use it to host their portfolio. So you can kind of look for whatever your product is, or products made with similar techniques. So, you can look for shoes or, it's backpacks, kitchenware, whatever you're making, and find, you can look at stuff that other people have made. It's kind of like the sites that host, that work for graphic designers like Dribble or something like that, where they can host their designs. Same thing for products. So you can get a sense of like what their portfolio looks like, which is pretty good. And then contact them, try and set something up. And then now we're at the phase, late last year, hired our first kind of full-time designer to join the team. So we've sort of been across the whole spectrum now over the last few years.
It's kind of a natural progression as the business grows, and you decided to bring that in-house and keep it close to home there.
Yeah, you start with less, whatever you can do for like less money, less commitment, all that sort of thing. And then you improve over time.
So yeah, that's I've heard some horror stories though where you hire somebody off Upwork, and you say, here's what I want, and you give them the details, and then what they come back with is nothing close to what you actually were looking for, had envisioned in your mind. So what does it look like to communicate well what you're looking for to this designer that you're going to hire?
Yeah, that's a hard one because everyone speaks the language a little bit differently. You may have a conversation and feel like, okay, we got it, we're on the same page, and then you realize you were talking about two different things. So I think part of it is what I described earlier, kind of presenting some of the problems and the ultimate goals of where you're trying to get. Because if you just talk about the nuts and bolts and just talk about the features, then they're going to cram all those features in to make you happy, but it doesn't really accomplish the real goal of the product. It's easy to kind of get caught up in the details and miss the bigger picture, which you want to make sure you do there. And then I would also make sure that as you're planning the project, you have milestones set up. So, there'll probably be some initial research, and you want to check in, after the research to see kind of what they're thinking, after some initial sketches to make sure you're on the same page, rather than, wait a month and get something back that's not at all what you expected.
So
Then
frequent
I think the
check-ins.
last, yeah, just to make sure that each step, rather than, wasting a bunch of money and time. And then the last thing is, I would say anything that, similar things, either whether they're similar products that you also like, so maybe some other products in that field or other brands in that field, that you want to give them as an example or illustration, and also stuff that you don't like. So it might be other products in that category that you think do a bad job, or look ugly or whatever the problems may be. So they can start to kind of visualize that end goal and what should and shouldn't be, even though right now you're just talking in theories and ideas.
So when you guys are creating these projects, do you use design briefs or like Gantt charts to plan out the whole project and timeline?
Yeah, that is definitely helpful, especially if you have a product like we do, where there's a lot of sampling and the you can put together a great tech pack for what we do and have everything measured out, all the hardware listed, but
Real quick,
it's
when you say tech pack, what do you mean by that?
so for cut and sew products like ours, it's basically a blueprint for a product like that. So it's the schematics. You've got everything sketched out. You've got every measurement dictated, descriptions of how to build things, list of the materials and the hardware, kind of all the details to give to the factory. Yeah, it's important to have a good tech pack to be able to communicate some of those ideas.
Right, right, right. Okay, cool. So, uh, just real quick to go back, the design brief and then the Gantt chart. So you kind of schedule out your whole like, okay, this is how long the project's going to take, and this is these are the steps along the way. So you know where to check in, like you were saying.
Right. And it'll be different for different kinds of products, right? You'll have those steps for the planning and idea stages. And then for something like soft goods like ours, you'll need a few samples. One, because the first one is never right, but also because, something looks great on paper, but then you make it in real life and it's uncomfortable to carry, or it doesn't hang right if it's something more, of clothing and fashion oriented, versus if you have something that's 3D modeled, or something more like hardware, you can get it pretty close with the 3D model, and that's what it'll look like in real life. Or you can 3D print, roughly what you're working on and see like, is this the right size? Is this shape comfortable? You can do a little bit more of check-ins before actually making something. So the stages will differ by product like that.
Okay, so I know that each product's going to take a different amount of time, but in general, how long should you expect this process to take?
Uh, it can expand as much as you have time and budget. From talking to designers, I think that a designer likes to be creative and try different things. You can throw around ideas indefinitely, basically, but you need to create the cutoffs kind of based on time. So if you're trying to release something by a certain date, or money. If you just only have budget for, whatever this person costs, you only have budget to pay them for a month, you better plan out and plan it for a month. So I would definitely leave some time in the earlier stages when it's cheaper to kind of generate ideas, generate different sketches. That is easier and cheaper to do. I'd put more time up front, though that could, someone could give you something in a week, but I would probably try and give them some more time and plan for a few weeks to at least a month, and try to put as much of your budget there versus and try to get kind of as far as you can at that stage, and then try to minimize the sampling stage as much as possible. So try and work out what you can in the cheaper mediums, sketching and 3D printing, versus once you get into actually, if you have to open a mold for something, that starts to get expensive. But that stage will kind of differ by product. For us, it's usually most factories will quote you 1 to 2 weeks to get you a sample, and you're probably going to go through 2 to 5, maybe depending on the complexity of the product. And if you're new to it and not very good at designing, like I was for a long time, then it'll take you longer.
So, I guess that's a good note to add here is that patience is a very good virtue to have during this entire process.
Yeah, your Gantt chart will certainly go out the window,
Yeah.
or at least multiply and take
Right,
up several sheets of your
right,
spreadsheet.
right,
But yeah, that's to be expected, but it's still worth at least trying to make a plan and try to stick to it.
right. Well, thanks, Fred. This has been a lot of great content, a lot of great value here. Just one last question. Any last words before we head off here?
Good luck, and I think the process that we kind of talked about earlier in terms of like starting small, doing what's easier first, start there, even if it's not the product that you ultimately want to build. It may be worth making something cheaper or simpler first, just to learn the ropes and invest the money there when it's a little bit smaller of a project, and then kind of get a little bit more advanced. Don't be fooled by all the fancy looking Kickstarters that you have to like invent something crazy and new and innovative right off the bat.
Right. Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.